That's me. www.wakeupdancing.com is where you are at, from Chicago to the world. Harv Roman with another exciting edition of Wake Up Dancing, but it's kind of not an edition of Wake Up Dancing. It is going to be an edition that I'm going to call a WCYC Classic Conversation. We're beginning to realize something that we've known for a long time already. There was a little radio station that could, here in Chicago years ago, located at 90.5 FM on the FM dial. Before that, it was 88.7. And because all of the things that are old are now new again, there's a whole big thing about kids that used to be at WCYC, people that used to listen, the artists that used to get interviewed. And I'm kind of thinking that maybe we should start having some documentation, some conversations, some retroactive memories of some sort, and talk about the classic WCYC, who some of you grew up listening to if you were anywhere near the Chicago South Side from the, let's say, the early 1980s up until the mid-1990s. So let me shut up. But on this particular edition of Wake Up Dancing or WCYC Classic Conversations, the first half of the program, which is about an hour and a half, just so you know, it's going to be myself, Majic Juan Suarez, and little Laura Hernandez. All voices and names that you should be familiar with if you are a fan of WCYC Radio. Second half, it will be myself, Majic Juan, and Sandy Castillo of Latin Soul as we talk about the artist view of WCYC and the impact and everything else. So, we'll have music here and there, but probably not as much as you want, because it's time for the words and not as much music as we start, hopefully, something new here on WakeUpDancing.com, WCYC's Classic Conversations. www.wakeupdancing.com. It is another in our hopefully long line of WCYC Legends Conversations, which if you log on to WakeUpDancing.com, you will clickety-click, and you'll be able to listen to voices of the past from a radio station that was born back in 1969 in the corner of 28th and Ridgeway. I didn't arrive there until 1985. Majic Juan Suarez, who's on one of the celebrity hotlines, didn't arrive there until 1984. And then Laura Hernandez, who's on the West Coast, arrived, I want to say, in 1987. And now we're all together just trying to have some reminiscing on a radio station that seemed to hit people upside the head a long time ago. So welcome to you both again.
Hey, Harv.
Oh, thank you. Hey, how are you?
Tired.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Juan. I think Juan should tell the story about how I came into CYC.
I don't think he remembers. But now this is an interesting aspect.
Wait a minute, because that's a little inside. I don't want to leave that without it leaving out there like an inside joke. I actually forgot.
So Laura, you've been trying to credit Juan with bringing you in, and he's been trying to remember bringing you in.
And he's trying to credit you all this time. With
all these years, I was giving you credit, Harv, for bringing her in, and it was me.
Well, I don't mind the credit.
That's hilarious.
I'll take the Rick Party credit, and then I'll take the Laura Hernandez credit. So that's good.
Take it. See?
Oh man.
But Laura, I was an instructor to you. I may not have been the first to ever deal with you, but I was a teacher. I was your instructor.
You were a teacher. Both of you were my teachers and my inspiration. It was listening to you guys on the radio that made me go, wow, that sounds fun. I can do that.
People, we need to refresh some memories here. I started WCYC as an office stooge. I was Harold Capa's buddy, his pal, his homie. I just did office stuff. I wasn't even on the air except doing news. As a matter of fact, one of my first newscasts was when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, and I was running board for Harold, and he gives me this, and he says, read it right now, and I had to take off the NPR programming and read this thing without previewing it, and my voice actually cracked as I read it. That's my first real memory of WCYC. And then, Juan, you got in an interesting way as well.
Yeah.
And then Laura, you can.
I got in because I was actually Harold's student, and Harold did not want me. The only way I could get on the air was I needed. Harold didn't want to leave me at the station alone, and I would just basically go to the Studio D and practice all day long. And Harold said, "Yeah, you're good. You're ready. I could put you on the air tomorrow." But I'm not going to do that. So he would just do that and do that. He did it for months, and then finally, one day I went in and I met Kenny Jason, and Kenny said, "How come Harold hasn't put you on the air?" And I told him, I said, "I don't know. He doesn't want me here without a producer." And it went from there. And then Kenny said, "Well, let me hear you how you sound on the air, without just practicing." And one Monday I went there, and somebody didn't show up for their shift. It was a 9 o'clock show, and Kenny was doing some mixing or doing some kind of recording in Studio B, and he says, "Do you know how to run the big board?" And I'm like, "Yeah, the main one, sure." And he gave me a stack of cards. He says, "Play this, play this, play this." I'm like, "Okay." And I did it for about an hour, just running IDs, running music, whatever. And I asked him, I said, "Hey, Kenny," I said, "would you mind if I go on the air?" And he said, "Sure." He says, "But, Harold hears you, He goes, he goes, "You know what?" He goes, "I'll cover for you. Just go ahead and let me hear you. Just see how you sound." He goes, "You're not nervous?" And I'm like, "A little bit." I said, "But I'm dying to get on the air." I said, I've been doing this for months already. Harold won't let me on. And I went on, and I turned around right after I was done. I said, "Kenny, how did that sound?" He goes, "You're awesome. You're good." He goes, "You're natural." He goes, "You'll be all right." I'm like, "Great." So then I did the whole show, and around 11:30, Kenny says, "If you want, you can leave because it's almost midnight." I'm like, "All right, I'll leave in a little bit." And he said, "Well, what are you doing next Monday?" And I'm like, "Nothing." And he's like, "Well," he says, "if you want, this is your show from here on out." He says, "I think you're ready." He said, "I'll have a talk with Harold." He says, "But you have to find a producer." He goes, "I'll tell him that it's going to be your show." He goes, "But just bring somebody with you who can do your paperwork." And he goes, "You can go ahead and have the show." He says, "Because the person that has it now hasn't been here consistently, and I need somebody who I can count on." He goes, "Plus, he goes, I think you can handle it." So that's pretty much my how I got on the air. I mean, but I was for months and months, and I think about 6 to 8 months, Harold just had me in a studio recording and practicing.
It wasn't intentional to mention Harold's name so much, but thinking about it now, we really should talk about Harold for a minute. Laura, you didn't meet him. I think he passed away before you came along, but Harold Capa was the director of the Little Village Boys and Girls Club, and he's the one that put that radio station together back in 1969 from a bunch of spare parts and little bits and pieces of old World War II radio equipment, because that was like his hobby. And he was the one who wound up putting WCYC literally on the air as 88.7, back in the day.
Right.
And then Kenny Jason, again, somebody else who probably doesn't get talked about enough. Kenny was a little boy who used to hang at the club with Harold, and Harold used to use him to do things that nobody else could do because Kenny was a little boy and he could fit into little holes and stuff. And Kenny ended up creating the Young Sounds, which was the precursor to what we did back in like 79, 1980 or so. So it probably wouldn't be a complete conversation if we didn't say, hey, if you go on the MySpace WCYC World page, there's a picture of an older guy with Bill Curtis and a little kid. That's Harold Capa, and not enough people, remember Harold because he passed away so long ago.
Yeah, Yep, Harold. For as much as he had his own way of doing things, and was very, he was very a matter of fact of what he wanted and how he was going to progress that station. And if he didn't want you to go on the air, you weren't going to go on the air, no matter how much you tried to convince him to let you go on, until he felt times were going to happen or something was going to happen for you. Well, in my case, I just didn't argue with him. I just said, okay, Harold, whenever you want me, I'm here. And he would tell me, even if you're late for your practice, I'm going to count that against you. So he kind of, from the beginning, he kind of showed me to be disciplined and tell me that this was a serious thing, and if I was going to progress into radio, that I better be serious about what I was going to do. What was that? He had a sign up, Harv. I don't remember the quote. What was the sign that he had on the wall? That
I don't know. There was a sign that Kenny had on a wall that said "Keep away, Harv." Remember that sign?
It was something about make sure your brain is engaged before.
Oh, before putting mouth in gear.
Yeah, was that what it was?
Yeah.
It was some quote that he had on the wall that he told me, and he says, "This is what I always want you to make sure that you do before you go on the air." And eventually, like I said, he fought Kenny and fought me, and he didn't want me there because he thought it was a dangerous thing for me, or whatever. But I thought it was I knew eventually once I got to meet Kenny that I was gonna be there for good.
So amongst the three of us, then we were all outcast in some way, shape, or form. Come to think of it, I'm looking at the MySpace page now, and I guess it was the summer of '86 when Kenny handed over the keys to the car and let me start running the station. But you reminded me of this, Juan, and I didn't quite remember that there was a whole anti-Harv faction at WCYC back then. I remember Kenny being mad enough that he lost his Saturdays to go up to Harold and threaten to walk out because then you guys were taking over Saturdays. But I didn't realize that it went so far as I don't want to say blackballing or conspiracy theories or anything like that, but you told me the story of how stuff got locked up so we wouldn't have access to it, so we had to create our own stuff on Saturdays.
Oh, yeah.
Told me the story of how stuff got locked up so we wouldn't have access to it, so we had to create our own stuff on Saturdays.
Oh yeah, I mean there was I mean for all intents and purposes there was, I don't want to call it conspiracy, I mean there was a separation of the group, so to speak, that this group Harv's group isn't allowed to use our music. There was a quote that, and I don't remember if it came down from Harold or from who it had come down from, but that I remember, in particular, when I would have to leave on Friday nights, because I think at the time I was hosting the Hot Mix Show too, where I eventually became host of the Hot Mix Show or whatever it was. We would have to lock that back studio where most of our carts were kept, and I don't think you had access to that door, so you'd have to bring in all your own stuff.
And Laura, You were kind of maybe it was age discrimination at the time, but you didn't quite fit in the beginning either, did you?
No, I didn't. And I was kind of I was guided a lot. A lot of the stuff I just kind of watched between you and Juan. The way that you handled yourself and the way that things should be done, which I guess wasn't a bad thing. Because you see things happening and you feel funny about them, so you kind of steer away from it. So. Watching the things and kind of with all that was going on with the locked studios and the locked bathrooms and the misbehavior, watching you guys just saying, okay, well, that's just like off my shoulders. I'm just going to let that slide. You grow up thinking, well, you can't let things like that get to you because then they're just going to hold you back. Now, had they not locked up the studios or whatever was going on, you wouldn't have been able to be so free with the music that you brought in. You introduced freestyle to the community, which a lot of people, want to take credit for that, but you actually were the first one to bring it here to the radio.
Well, I guess what becomes important to me sometimes now at my old age is back then and even now the artists haven't seemed to forget what station really gave them their break and got their collective feet in the door, where there are people that will say, I've done this for so many years and I've done that for so many years. The artists themselves know when they're giving you album credits, when they're calling you ahead of time to tell you that they're on their way. We were talking to Sandy Castillo of Latin Soul not too long ago, and she would call as a fan of the station, not just an artist. Then you say, yeah, I guess we did things, the right way. But yeah, there's a lot of people that probably want to, in some ways, set the record straight as to who did what. Freestyles is still, in a lot of ways, alive and breathing now, more than 20 years into the game since we all started at WCYC. Now, my beginnings there were through Vince Gomez because I was a Boys and Girls Club guy. I worked at a Boys and Girls Club, and there was an opportunity to work at another Boys and Girls Club that just happened to have a radio station, and that's how I wound up getting introduced to WCYC. So I wasn't a listener first. Laura and Juan, I'm curious as to your original exposures to WCYC, because Laura, I think you told me before, you were a listener.
Oh yeah, I was a faithful listener. Like I said, I had one of those old school radios with the one speaker in it, and they were cheapy, so the antennas would break off. So you run around the house and trying to figure out, somebody give me a wire hanger, I'm going to miss my show. And I used to love listening to Juan. And I'd call in and, make my dedications. And, after a while, I became one of Juan's regular listeners. Not that he would remember, but I have to refresh his memory in his old age.
It was regular.
And one day I think his producer didn't show up. And I believe that was your sister, right, Juan, that used to come out and help you.
Yeah, I think at the time, either it was my sister or it was somebody else who because I know I had a running parade of producers, including my sister, for a little bit, and they weren't always there, and I think it got to the point where I guess the story is that Laura happened to call me, and you take it from there, Laura.
Okay, because you don't remember Grandpa. But,
and again, this is something.
I happened to call, and Juan says, you know what, my producer didn't show up, would you mind coming in? And I think at that point, Laura,
I think at that point, Laura, obviously, Laura, you already expressed an interest in becoming the station, right?
Oh yeah.
The station, right?
Yeah, I had already questioned, how do you go about being on the radio, and is it something, just how do you get your foot in? Because I knew this was part of the Boys and Girls Club. This was something that originated there. So, when he asked, can you come in? Because I got excited. I asked my brother, can you give me a ride? I'm going to go help. And that's how it started. So I started off just with that one day, and I never left after that. Juan told me what he needed done, and I would pull his music and fill his logs out, and he would go on and do whatever it was he needed to do. I did that for about a year behind the scenes before Juan says, you want to get on the radio and read some dedications for me. And I'm like, is that going to be all right? Yeah, it's going to be all right. Don't worry about it. So I did that, and so Juan gets the phone call from Harv, hey, Laura needs to get that training, and can't put her on the air like that. So
that's very good.
Then I was formally introduced to Harv, and I went through the training process, and, I started doing your Saturday mornings. By then you were on your Saturday mornings, Harv. I think was it Lover's Lane already then?
Probably. We did a 90.5 Lover's Lane, which was interesting too, though, because it started off as a 15-minute slow jam segment, and then it became people calling and wanting to hear songs, and then I just kept bumping things, and then it became the hour from 11 to 12 that led into noon, which eventually was 90.5 Lover's Lane. And then even after I left, Cesar Romo, Gino's little brother, kept the title and kept the show.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, that's true. In the 90s, there was a love. And ironically, he used to do it on Friday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that.
But Laura, I want to hear, this is going to be an interesting dynamic, because as we have these, for lack of a better term, WCYC Legends conversations, I really would like to hear from listeners and the impact that the station had from a listener's vantage point. So I'm curious, as to you being this preteen or this teenager who is fighting to get a hold of 90.5 FM, which wasn't an easy signal to pick up. What was it like as a listener? Number one, trying to tune in, which wasn't easy, and then number two, tuning into 90.5 FM when you could have been tuning into any number of radio stations. People like you chose WCYC, and I've never really asked you this, and we've known each other forever.
I think it had to do with the way music was changing, and you get all the big stations, and they were all playing the same thing. So you're kind of rolling through your stations, and that song, you heard that already on that station, and that song. So when we found CYC, it was actually me and my niece, and we stopped. The music was just different. And as we started to listen to it on a daily basis, just your lineup, your rotation of music was different from what the regular radio stations were doing, and it was dance music and stuff. You would only, I guess, in that time was playing at the clubs, or if you went to cotillions, then you got to hear it. But it wasn't something that was normally played on the radio. So we became fans of the music. It was something that was more. I said it was more geared towards a younger group of people.
Was there a cult of people that would just tell each other about this little rinky-dink radio station? Because I wouldn't have known if it wasn't for Vince Gomez telling me that there was this radio station in existence. And then when I lived in Bridgeport for a couple of years, man, it took forever for me to try to pick up the station. And then they invented digital receivers, and I did a better job of it. But I'm telling you, a fan of WCYC had to make an extra effort in order to pick it up.
But you know what, Harv, and as a listener, how I started, how I got involved was, and you're right, it was a cult sort of following and an underground sort of deal, because in the beginning, I don't know if you remember, but the Young Sounds, what we were called at the time,
right,
when I got involved, the Young Sounds was, there wasn't a straight sort of, there was a broken sort of time frame in terms of format. we were only on certain hours of the day. We were on like from 4 to 6, and then we would switch over to Spanish, or we would switch over to Harold's pre-recorded stuff that he wanted us to play between 6 and 8 on Monday nights and on Friday nights. I remember that he would let us go late, till midnight or till 2 in the morning or whatever it was. But those were also broken times where there was always that after-school programming, we called it, between 4 and 6, or sometimes 3 and 6, depending. But mainly it was 4 and 6 every day. You could count on that pretty much. But Monday night, we would come back at 9 o'clock. Friday night, he would let us go straight on from 4 in the afternoon all the way straight through Saturday afternoon. That sort of became the cult following of the Young sound, and that's how I got, trying to be a DJ at the time. And so I knew of it also being part of the Boys Club and growing up on the South Side, and knowing that it existed there. That's how I kind of got involved. And what got me involved was the uniqueness of the interaction of how, I don't know if you remember when Kenny started recording kids from high school, like from Curie or from Farragut or from wherever. He did a pretty cool thing where he started having actual listeners call and say, "Hi, my name is Lisa, and I'm from Curie High School, and I listen to CYC."
They would do drops. I remember that. There was a whole reel-to-reel filled with drops.
Yeah, just a bunch of drops filled with kids, regular listeners, and instead of us doing the drops, it was the actual listeners doing the drops. And I always thought that was pretty cool. And I think that sort of endeared us in sort of way to, listeners, because we were sort of broadcasting to them and made them feel a part of the station. And I think that was always the difference that we had between the other station. And plus, we were in the neighborhood. You could walk right down the street and literally almost walk into the radio station at all times.
And so, Laura, you're listening to Juan. You're a fan of his show, and you picked up the phone not to make a dedication, but to ask how you could get involved.
Yeah, well, that's the majority of our conversations were, just how do you go about?
She had an interest. She had an interest in radio, and and I talked to her for a while because I'm like, she's probably just some young kid trying to just find out how things work or whatever. And I don't know. At first I never took her very seriously, or from a serious level. But the more she called, the more I knew she was very interested in doing it. So that's when I was like, well, And I used to tell her too, well, go meet Harv. I think Harv can help you. But and I thought at the time that she had already met you. I didn't know that I was the first one to bring her into the station.
Well, welcome to 2010. And Laura, then you had to do the traditional thing and go through training. You don't wake up one day and wind up on the radio, do you?
No, you don't. I had to go through the training. So it was the sitting in the classes and learning to run the board, and reading news and weather. So it was just basic stuff. With Juan, it was just reading dedications, But once I got to sit down with you, then it was learning how everything actually worked, and how you rotate the music and fill out these logs, and so there was an entire process to it.
Well, apparently there were life lessons involved too. You were recently with me on 1450 AM with your daughter, who's a superstar in her own right, and when we were talking on Club Kids Radio, you were talking about how. And I'll still try to get a grasp on it, and then you can talk about it with Juan también. Some of the lessons from the WCYC days wound up, in some way, shape, or form, helping you in your role as a mother of a daughter who is now performing, and a son who is also performing, and another son who's also, involved in church and stuff.
Yeah, it did. It had a big part to do with it. I think that in many ways, had I never picked up the phone and called Juan, and that one day, it's actually that one day where he said, hey, can you come down and help me out? That was the beginning of what the foundation that I stand on today.
Up my
some of the lessons from the WCYC days wound up in some way, shape, or form helping you in your role as a mother of a daughter who is now performing, and a son who is also performing, and another son who's also, involved in church and stuff?
Yeah, it did. It had a big part to do with it. I think that in many ways, had I never picked up the phone and called Juan, and that one day, it's actually that one day where he said, hey, can you come down and help me out? That was the beginning of what the foundation that I stand on today. I give WCYC, you and Juan, a lot of credit for me being who I am now. Had you not opened the door for me, back then, I lived on 24th and Holman. It was a rough neighborhood to grow up in. It wasn't you just go sit outside and hang out with your friends. A lot of the times my mother wouldn't even let us look out the window. It was difficult. Growing up in just in that age and in, I guess, in that era. I think that being involved in something that was as positive as WCYC was, it helped me to understand and to build responsibility and to learn that, follow through. Because at WCYC, between you and Juan watching, following through, being onto your shifts on time, and, all of that, and sometimes people didn't show up, so you're covering for other people, it shows, I don't know how to explain it in just...
Well, in your case in particular, because you're one of the younger ones, younger than I even remember, it became more of a, I'm not going to say a little sister thing, but that's kind of what it was. I mean, I felt not only were you a student of the radio station, and of course we're in the Boys and Girls Clubs unit, but I also felt like I needed to protect you from whatever might come out of it. And I remember we would have meetings, and I would tell the jocks that you don't develop relationships with the listeners, and you don't give away your names and things like that, or the phone numbers, because I would really get worried, because listeners ended up getting attached to jocks in ways that doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
Or maybe it didn't happen back then either. But I mean, I was literally trying to watch out for people like you, Laura, because I didn't want you to wind up, in trouble with anybody.
You know what, and I thank you for that, because that took me into, it taught me to respect, a lot of the things that you said, and this is coming from someone, who I admire, and, I have a lot of esteem for this person who's training me in something that I really wanted to do. I learned to respect myself, and then with what I learned at the radio station in between you and Juan, I was able, growing up, to take on a lot of leadership positions, and to show my kids the same, to follow in the same footsteps. I was able to do, growing up now, after WCYC, it gave me the confidence just to be a strong-minded person and always respect myself. And, to be positive about life and, what, even when it throws, bad things at you, you have to come out ahead all the time. So I've done things, even within, I've stayed in Pilsen, and I helped out with the community. I was involved, I co-chaired a fundraiser for St. Paul's Church over on 22nd and Damon. They were losing their school, and I co-chaired the committee that raised the money to keep the school open. I've worked with Esperanza's Foundation, the Fiesta del Sol, as well. My best friend is actually her granddaughter. So I've stayed working within the community and keeping the kids. And, right now here in California, I've built a children's choir in a Spanish community that wasn't there. I've also, when I was living in Chicago, in Plainfield, I built a children's choir. I've always wanted to kind of keep everybody, from my experience at CYC, because everybody was so young, and, you can do these positive things and come out ahead. I want it the same for everybody else. And I do that with my children because be it as it may, every family has its good and its bad, but CYC, we were a tight-knit family. And that family, we argue and stuff like that, and we have our disagreements, but in the end, we represent something very positive. That I was able to bring into my family. There's some things, I've got teenage kids, and, sometimes we don't agree, but in the end, we represent something positive. I keep my children close, and, my son is a musician, and he helps me at the church, and my other son is also a musician, helps me in the church. My daughter, she cantors, and now she's acting and modeling, and she's done some positive things because of the foundation that WCYC allowed me to have it. It allowed me to build on this positive, this very positive thing.
It's
and I'm very grateful for that. And I would like for everybody to have that same experience because not everybody gets to do that. It's not easy. And just like Juan says, you just don't walk in the radio station one day and say, look at how long it took Juan for them to finally put him on the air.
Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and that's what, when I finally had my chance, I wasn't going to, I knew deep down inside this wasn't easy for me to get, so I wasn't going to sort of take advantage of that situation and take it for granted that it would always be there. And I always in the back of my mind, I was fearful that I would lose it, so I tried to, even though I knew there was crazy things going on around us behind the scenes, with everybody hanging out, and, the truth is the truth. I mean, there was parties going on at the radio station and people hanging out and things of that nature, things that would happen. I would try to steer clear of some of that a lot of times because I knew anything could happen and we could all be, we could all lose it, because there was always the threat of there was never enough money to run the radio station. There was never enough resources to do what we needed to do. And I remember even when Harold passed away, one of the first things that they wanted to eliminate was the radio station. And I remember having to call some of my professors from Columbia College and even asking them, hey, if there was a possibility that they could come down and help. Because one of the problems that they had was the Boys Club. I remember the Boys and Girls Club saying, we don't think we could find anybody to run that radio station, and if Harold's gone, we might as well just shut the station down. I don't know if you remember that, Harv.
Yeah, I remember there was people that didn't think that it was doing the things that it could have been doing. But I remember the media, Chicago Tribune Magazine in 1988, ABC 7 with Teresa Gutierrez, that was in 88, 87 or so. And in both of those interviews, I remember being asked about what we were there to do. And I never said we were there to develop radio stars of the future. I would always talk about teaching young people how to communicate and to be more respected. And that's really what I felt we needed to do. I didn't like the idea that the community itself was known as gangland and a bunch of troublemakers, because I knew that there were some good people in that area. And then when it came to us, we may have been people that on the streets, we may have looked and sounded like everybody else, but on the air, I wanted people to have a level of respect for us and for you guys as students. And I really wanted it to be an experience that you would carry with you above and beyond WCYC. I thought it was important that we got away from the slang and we got away from sounding like homeboys and homegirls, even though I don't think they called them homeboys and homegirls back in the 80s, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
It was really important to me for you to be respected and for you guys to learn how to communicate and be able to express yourselves. And I guess we did a pretty good job of it, considering, I'm listening to the both of you now, being as articulate as you are. Laura, well, I guess it wasn't easy because you were 13 years old when you come on board. I'd like to hear some of those stories about you being on the air for the first time and things that you did on stage at the Oak Theater, or interviews that you've done before we wind up running out of time.
Well, being on air for the first time, I think I was actually filling in for Juan. Wasn't able to come in. So that was by luck. Not that I was wishing on it, Juan, but it was by luck. You happened to call in, and I was there like always, ready to produce for you. And you called in, said you weren't going to make it. ready to produce for you, and you called in, said you weren't going to make it, you weren't feeling well, and I didn't know what to do, to be honest with you. I was scared. I had been on the air, but there was always someone running the board. And I called Harv, and, you know, from the training, you said, you know what, I feel that you're ready, you can do it. If you have any problems, call me, and I can walk you through it. But I kept it really simple. The very first time I was on the radio, I kept it very simple. I went on there, and, you know, station ID, weather, news, announced the song and back. I think it took me a couple of shows before I actually started to develop some kind of personality and some kind of connection with the listeners that were coming in. You know, so it wasn't even easy then. I don't think I was as natural as Juan or as you were. So it did take some time. So it was kind of nerve-wracking, you know. And even the first time when we were all hosting a party, I think everybody was able to get up on stage. You know, I didn't know what to say then either. And that was I don't even remember when the Oakwood was. How long I had been on the radio before I actually got on stage to host a party. And as easy as it looks, it's not. It's not. You know, everybody got up there and they had their things to say, and, you know, I didn't feel as comfortable as everybody else in front of people. And I think that the Oakwood might have been the only party that I helped host.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't remember.
We didn't let you after that.
I think you helped at the Prime and Tender one, but it was real quick.
Well, for the anniversary, yeah.
Yeah. Because
it's not easy. I mean,
yeah.
You know, you stand in front of all these people staring at you, waiting for you to say something magnificent. I wasn't Harv, and I didn't have little shorts, so.
Don't worry. I always felt goofy up there too. So even when people ask me to do it today, I'm like, I don't want to do it. But
yeah.
Tell me about the interaction with the listeners.
Different now.
Once you became an air jock, Laura, tell me about the interaction with the listeners. You know, listening to Juan and myself, of course, and Sandy, and you guys throughout the years, it seems as if WCYC was going to be known for anything, it was probably known for the relationship between the station and the listeners. It wasn't just the station that played stuff and you tuned in.
I think we took it very. I don't think we took our listeners for granted, knowing that. Sometimes you could walk down the street and some people would say, "What's CYC?" You know, and they would literally live across. You know, some of them would live a couple of blocks away. You know, so I think a lot of us I think we treasured the fact that there was actually people who cared about. They weren't just listening. They weren't just hearing what we were doing on the air. They actually were paying attention. They were listening. You know, and I think there's a big difference between hearing what you're doing and listening to what you're doing. And I think when we were able to convey some sort of message, or whether it was through music or whatever, that's the thing that I think was really. I think a lot of us took it. I think subconsciously we kind of said, "Wow, you know, this really works," you know, and the only thing I think in the beginning that we could have did a little bit more of, which I think we did more in the '90s, was a lot more community service, maybe a lot more topical. We could have been maybe talked about a lot more things. We did that more in the '90s, but I think in the '80s we were still learning and growing and identifying with who we were. And unfortunately, a lot of us didn't get to stick around. I think as long as I think some of people should have, with all the changes that came along in the '90s. But I think that we would have had much more of an impact than what we had already did in those years. And you know, needless to say, who knows how much of an impact we would have had if we would have even had the technology that we have now with the internet and everything else.
Well, both of you coming from that particular community, because I was from Westtown, which is the Chicago Grand area. What was WCYC looked at from a community standpoint? You know, not only when I ran it, but, you know, beyond and before. You know, was WCYC any sort of beacon or any kind of staple in the community, or was it just something that was there?
think it depends on who you talk to. Some people really took it as a serious outreach and an outlet for the community. Other people didn't. It didn't matter to some people because they were like, oh, I get in my car and I can't pick you up when I'm on Ashland Avenue or whatever, or I can't pick you up in Berwyn. To some people, they're like, you're not really a radio station. You're part of the boys club. And I think that had some sort of it didn't register or resonate with some older more business people until the 90s, when we really showed what we were doing or what we were trying to do with the community. When we became a little bit more community interactive, that's when some of those things began to work. But I think I don't think it ever got to the point, to the stage where I think we could have gotten to.
Yeah, we wound up with a reputation in which artists would tell other artists, this is where you need to go.
Right.
Before you go anywhere else.
Right.
This is where.
Yeah, I remember a lot of the stuff that other stations take credit for, had been played at CYC. We were actually on the air in CYC maybe 3 years prior to it crossing over to the major commercial stations. And the listeners, it was already in their ears, and that's one thing that WCYC has always done. It's put it in the air. You're putting in all this good music in their ear, and then they want to hear it somewhere else. Which was a big thing for all the artists, because I think we brought in some of those artists before anybody thought to bring them in to do shows and performances. I remember people going crazy for ticket giveaways for small things like parties at the Lawndale Hall, which back then were probably big things, because, now they were able to see the artist put a face to the voice.
Right. Yeah, I remember some of those parties being insane, absolutely out of control. I mean, just so crowded where you couldn't even walk. It was crazy.
So for all the credit that maybe WCYC didn't get, the crowd told a different story, the listeners told a different story, the performing artists told a different story, and now you guys as personalities are telling a different story. So someone's right and someone's wrong.
Well, most definitely, I can say as a listener and as an on-air personality, and as someone, I think I was one of the ones who stayed a little bit longer than most, maybe 86, 87, all the way through almost the end of 92. And just to see the changes and what WCYC managed to do is to change along with the times and to continue to bring the new music. And I think that's why it's been so impactful. I mean, even right now, you go to Chicago and you mention, like some of the radio DJs, that we get a lot of respect for who we were and what they became. Just recently I ran into, on my Facebook, he's Donnie Devo now. And when I logged in, I said, I remembered him. And I said, hey, you remember me? It was Flora from WCYC. He posted right away on my Facebook, on my wall. He posted from WCYC to WGCI. This is where they remember their roots, and that's a great thing. Look at me. Here I am helping. Further my daughter's career, and I'll never forget where I started. I'll never forget that the big leadership positions that I've taken in my life, my ground and my base and my foundation has always been this small radio station on the corner of 28th and Ridgeway, who opened their doors to me and said, hey, you know what? You can do this, and I'm going to show you how to do it. It wasn't just come on in. It was come on in, and then I'll show you. And I was guided every step of the way, even when I made my mistakes.
Were you looking for an outlet back then as a 13-year-old teenager? Were we, in essence, some sort of escape to whatever was happening in that community, or were you just attracted
to
it?
Like I said, I couldn't even look out the window because of the things that were going on in my area.
But if you want it broken, give it to a girl. Girls like to play with
had my mother allowed me to, either I would have been sheltered or I'd have been somewhere on the streets doing things I shouldn't have, And I can say that growing up, the people in my neighborhood, I must have lost maybe 5 or 6 friends out in the streets because they had nothing better to do but to hang out and, I hate to say it, but, they were out gangbanging or being in places where you're not supposed to. I've had 2 of my friends that were killed as innocent bystanders, So to be able to come out at least 3 hours out of my day or, whatever it took me to walk to the radio station and back, just that moment to be able to get out and do something positive. Granted, there were other things in the community that you can do, the Boys and Girls Club and things like that, but this was really different. It was right smack in the middle of our community. And it was walking distance. So if we didn't have a ride, well, you just walk. Everybody makes an excuse for not doing things. And, being dead center of that, there was no excuse. And that was my outlet. Well, instead of not being able to peek out the window, my mom would be like, well, what are you doing? No, close the window. You're going to get shot.
We're at www.wakeupdancing.com. Harv Roman, Celebrity Hotline with Majic Juan Suarez and Laura Hernandez, both personalities from the classic WCYC. We're going to take about 10 seconds, and we'll return. WCYC.com is what we're listening to from, and I'm going to steal a line from you, Juan, from Chicago to the world. We're online at www.wakeupdancing.com, and I would imagine some of this might wind up on AM 1450, but we're just not sure. We're on a celebrity hotline, and it is a conversation, and I don't know if we should call this classic WCYC conversations, a roundtable discussion, WCYC legends. I don't know. All I know is that we have talked forever, Juan, about having roundtable conversations with personalities that were involved with the classic WCYC here in Chicago. And so now we've got you on a Monday morning, President's Day, and we've got Sandy Castillo of Latin Soul on the other line, and later on we'll have conversations with other air personalities and people who are important to WCYC, because it turns out, Juan, that WCYC has become important to people all of a sudden.
Yay! Well, finally. I just want to say this. Maybe we should call it all of the above, and that's what we'll kind of call it for now.
It's WCYC Legends.
Thanks for having me, and it's awesome to be here. It's awesome to be online and to reminisce a little bit. And I think it's a good time, because it seems like in the promotion world, everything seems to be coming back to retro and nostalgia, and everything's becoming a reunion party nowadays. So
yeah,
it's a cool thing.
Now, I wanted to talk about how each of us initially got involved with the radio station, and we'll do that more with some of the air personalities. Sandy Castillo of Latin Soul, you're more unique in terms of WCYC because you became one of our core artists. What do you remember from your introduction to WCYC and whatever it did or maybe didn't do for you when you were performing?
Hello, first of all. And what it did for me, WCYC was a giant launching pad. I mean, you guys pretty much served as our PR. Did Juan cut you a check? Because you definitely provided a service for us. Otherwise, I'm not sure how we would have got the song out there. So yeah, I attribute the success I still experience today to WCYC from 20 years later.
That's crazy because off the air we've been talking about the fact that you've still been out there performing. Juan and I both have to thank you because you wound up coming out of retirement, so to speak, to work an event for us at Studio 63.
Guys, the first one, you're right.
Yeah.
And now you're back. And the weird part about that particular reunion was that Damien, one of your former Latin soul dancers, wound up going to this event, and Marisa Lopez winds up going to this event. And it seems like every time there's a gathering of people that had some connection to WCYC, you wind up with people that you haven't seen in years. It's actually literally like some sort of reunion.
Yeah, it's a fair assessment. I would totally agree.
Well, what was that like when you came back for the first time?
Oh my God, it was so thrilling. And, I told Juan, I've told you, there's always this insecurity that, that maybe people don't really remember you, that the promoters are just sort of blowing sunshine up your what just to, get you to come out. But it was great. When I went out there, I mean, everybody on the dance floor was singing with me. Like, I could barely hear myself through the monitor because the crowd was singing with me. And it was amazing. I was like, wow, they really do like me and they really do remember me. It was a very cool experience.
Now, if anybody has seen any footage on YouTube, because I know it's on there, you had a blast on stage. It showed that you were just having a good time. Yeah, there may have been some nerves, but when I look at that videotape, you were having a blast.
I was having a blast, and I think a big part of it was you, Harv. You made me feel very, very comfortable. Like, my career started with you, and then, 20 years later, it kind of came full circle because you had a large part in getting me back out on stage. So, there was just that comfort, that warm, fuzzy feeling as well that was contributing to the experience overall.
About you back then, Sandy and Juan, and actually a lot of the artists that came through WCYC, is that you guys, you were performers and you were artists and you came to do interviews and push product, but correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of you wound up becoming fans of the station itself. You guys would call a show even if you weren't booked to interview. You guys would call a show and talk about whatever, or make a request, or even a dedication. It was weird in that the artists became fans, where it's usually the fans who are there for the artists.
Right. You guys were innovative in that you were playing stuff other radio stations weren't playing. You kind of held the market on a genre of music. And so, as an artist and being passionate about that genre, of course, you wanted to connect with other artists, with fans, so that I think that's what kept bringing us back to WCYC.
One of the coolest things, Sandy, I can recall, was when you and Juan Tovar, like Harv was just talking about, would just show up and just hang out at the station, just to be a part of a show. And I mean, there was other artists that did it as well, but I really felt like, the wildest thing was when we actually had, me and Harv were talking about this the other day, when we had, fast forward, literally, he had a couple of days to just hang out from some show, and he stood a few days extra, a layover, so to speak, and literally wound up filling in for somebody who couldn't come in to do a show. He wound up being DJ for a day, which is pretty awesome. I felt like, and it gave it gave him a bit different perspective of how we did things, and then also the audience. I think that was more special with the audience, who really seemed to get a big thrill from that, which I thought, Harv being obviously the program director and manager at the time, I thought that was pretty innovative and pretty creative, that we were allowing that sort of interaction to go that far. And
right.
That's something that you don't see too much nowadays. So.
Because everything's so corporate, you got to fly it up the flagpole and get all these okays, and WCYC was just communal, like familial. It was just this small little family, and almost anything goes, but it worked. Sometimes anything goes, you don't know what you're going to get, but it just worked. People were respectful, and it was a really great feeling.
Can I ask you a question? Let's talk about the longevity of what's happened with your song here. I know for a fact that there's people that still love the song who grew up with it, but now you're having a second generation find out about your music, and what sort of how do you feel when you get like a 20-year-old or a 20-something-year-old come up to you and say, I love this song because I grew up on it?
Well, let's put it this way. How does it feel that your song is now older than a lot of your fans?
It blows my mind, and in the circumstance of the 20-year-old that said she grew up on my song, she has a young child at home who listens to mixtapes, and she says her little girl is singing along to Promise Me. So I mean, it just tells you how relevant the music is. It blows my mind, frankly. I don't know what to quite say to it, but I mean, I'm always really humbled and flattered, and it's exciting to hear, and I just say thank you.
Can we take for those of you who are listening again, can we take a quick trip of memory lane of the history of Promise Me and how it came about?
Sure. I had met Juan Tovar at Rockabee's on, what was it, like Southwest Highway or Harlem, in and around that area. I can't think of it, like maybe Worth it was towards. Anyway, so I was friends with a DJ, and Juan had come into the club to deliver some records that he had special ordered. And then, like, the DJ walked away to say hi to somebody else, and it was just Juan and I standing there. And it was sort of awkward because he hadn't introduced us. And so Juan's like, well, hi, my name's Juan, and he's telling me about the record store he owns on Western. And jokingly, I had said, ooh, maybe you'll see my record on your shelf one day. And he's like, really, you sing? And I said, no, but I'm an aspiring singer. And he was at the point where his record store had taken off, had a really good following, was doing well. And he wanted to branch out into music production. So he's like, you know what, this is kind of, maybe kismet a little bit. Why don't you come in the store, because I've been wanting to do this, and let's hear you sing and see what you've got. So I went to his store, not right away. At first there was that reluctance and that hesitancy, like, okay, is this guy really who he says he is? Can I trust him? But eventually I went for it, and he had some DJ friends there, and I sang like 3 different freestyle-ish songs, and Promise Me was the clear-cut winner amongst our poll, and so we went into production right from that. It moved pretty quickly after I auditioned for him. We had some local Chicago talent do mixes. It was not like a out-the-gate start. It was kind of a slow, steady, increase in popularity, and as we actually started noticing that Latino following was probably biggest of anything else. So then Juan made the decision to go back in the studio and do a bilingual version, and then that really took off quite well. And so we sort of rode that for a while. We did try going to New York to get the cutout there. Again, met some really nice people. They said they'd push the song with, the best they could. Unfortunately, we never really quite got out of Chicago, though.
Just a little tidbit, so I don't know if you even know this. Juan Tovar was one of my idols as I was growing up. He was one of my inspirations to go to Columbia College.
Oh, great.
Yeah, long time.
Juan Tovar, Celebrity Corner on WCRX.
I used to go and hang out there when I was in high school. Well, a lot of Saturday Celebrity Corners and things of that sort of thing that he did on the air.
Tony Boom Boom Medea and I worked an event at Northwest Settlement House one year, and Juan Tovar was the big host at that time, and they were pushing a special appearance by Michael Jackson, which obviously you knew it wasn't going to be Michael Jackson. Juan shows up with his goofy zipper jacket and one glove and sunglasses, and that was his idea of special appearance by Michael Jackson.
I don't think I ever heard that story.
No,
That's fantastic.
If you run into him,
but
you
yeah,
ask him.
He was. I haven't heard from Juan Tovar, but if you're out there, buddy, give us a call.
He's in this area a lot because his father's still at Commercial Park, working over here right across from Chicago Avenue, right around Walcott.
Yeah, I mean, I hear he's out there, but I haven't. Like I said, I personally haven't heard from him in a long time.
Yeah, I've heard of sightings, yes, but I don't know much more than that.
Hey, was WCYC your first in-studio interview, Sandy?
Yeah, for sure, it was.
Because I remember when you guys came in, there was a couple times that you guys came. When you first came in, you probably had, I think I have a picture up on the MySpace and the Facebook. There probably was like 6 or 7 people in the traveling troupe. It was you and Juan, and I think you had 4 or 5 girls with you too.
Yeah. We did have some dancers come and go, and I guess we just had a little bit of an entourage too. Just people that were always really supportive and helped however they could. So we'd all go together to these functions because it was fun, and as a way of, it was one of our ways of saying thank you for supporting us. So come hang out with us and enjoy what the support's bringing.
And I remember that interview in particular because, and I didn't want to be wrong about it being the first time. But in all of your cases, except for Juan, it seemed as if there were some nerves happening. And then as time went on and you guys were taking phone calls and we were just shooting the breeze, it was just a conversation. And the interviews, or at least the interviews I did, I shouldn't speak for anybody else because I can't speak for anybody else, but for the interviews that I did, and some of the ones that I've heard Juan do, it always was more of a conversation. It wasn't an interview, we talked about whatever. It wasn't let's talk about what we're going to talk about. It was just let's just run with it and see what happens.
Yeah. Anyway. That was I think that's a formula that works. People want to hear real people. I think that's a reason why you might like a particular someone you look up to, is because they come across as a real person, and so you succeeded in conducting interviews in that sort of light.
Hey, Juan, Sandy doesn't remember.
Oh, are we going to do this?
She doesn't remember the Roses episode. Do you?
What was that?
The Roses, the Sweetest Day, Latin Soul, in studio. You don't remember either. Was this a figment of my imagination? Oh, nobody remembers the Rose story. Harv Roman over here at www.wakeupdancing.com. Something that we're trying new, and we're calling it WCYC's Classic Conversations. Our thanks to you, the listener, for putting up with all of us. Sandy Castillo of Latin Soul, or I should say Sandy Castillo Smith. She's now married. Sitting ovation for her. Also, Laura Hernandez, who's also married with children, and Majic Juan Suarez, who's also married, and he's got kids, and I've got my kid, but not so much married. Wow. If this works for you, if this format works, where we bring back voices of the past and throw them online at www.wakeupdancing.com, let us know. Throw in a comment, go to the Facebook /Harv Roman or the MySpace.com /Harv Roman or /WCYC World. Find a way to let us know what you think about this. The next time we do this, we will do the remainder of the Sandy Castillo interview, and then we'll find others, including some more bonus audio footage of Juan and Laura, stuff that you don't want to miss. In the meanwhile, here's one of Sandy's songs.